Welcome to another episode of Wired In with Appaveli. Let's get wired in. Let's talk about some code. So today we're going to talk about casting in C#. And we're still going over the basics of C#. So if you're a beginner, this is helpful for you. If you're advanced, maybe not so much. Maybe this is boring. But I still believe, even if you're advanced, it's always good to go over the basics. It's always good sometimes just to to play around with the language, just the core functions of the language without using the framework. The languages evolve over time, and they add a lot of new features. So it's just good to play around with that, and also you might come up with more efficient ways to write code or to refactor your existing code on a project that you're working on. So sometimes it's just really good to go over the basics. I don't think you can ever have too much experience to just go over the basics. A lot of stuff you probably don't use, but again, it's just good to go over it. Actually, you do use a lot of the basics. So if you don't really understand the basics, you're in trouble, because what happens is that a lot of times when we're stuck on a problem, we'll Google it and you'll copy and paste it. It works, but you don't know why it works. And it could be something very trivial. So it's good to go over the basics so you can know, like, oh, this is why I have to cast this. Okay, I have to convert this to a string, and vice versa. So let's get wired in. If you're looking at the code or listening and following and looking at the code on GitHub, following along on GitHub, you'll see I have 4 data types: integer, double, float, decimal. Now, an integer basically represents whole numbers. Double, float, decimal represents floating points. Now, double is what you probably will most commonly use. Floats you might use. It depends if you're doing graphics. Decimal you will use if you need to really be precise when you're doing financial calculations. So you'll know what kind of data type you'll need based on the problem you're trying to solve, really. But in most cases, you'll probably use integer, double, string. And if you're doing complex financial calculations and you don't want rounding errors, you're going to want to use a decimal. Now notice, when I declared integer, declared a equals 5, double b 5, decimal 0. It's a floating point. So floating points usually they have a decimal. And then when you declare a float, you have to declare a floating point with the decimal with the lowercase f behind it. And then with the decimal, you have to declare it with an m behind it. So let's compile this and just see what happens. It's going to print out these numbers. So let's let it build. And there we have it. Integer 5, double 5, float 5, decimal 5.0. All right, on to the fun stuff, right? So here, if you want to comment this code out again, you can either use Control K and C, or you can just go to Edit Advanced and comment code. So we're going to uncomment this code here. All right, so we're going to cast. Oh, you know what? I can't comment this out. I actually need these variables. There. So we're going to cast the int. We're going to cast the double to an int. and then we're going to cast the decimal to a double. So if you notice, int cast int is the variable name. So a right here is an integer, but b is a double. So what happens if I get rid of this? You're going to get an error. See the red line? See that error? Let's see what it says. Cannot implicitly convert type double to int. An explicit conversion exists. Are you missing a cast? So it's basically telling you what you need to do. Double operator, double left, double right. So this is how you cast types. So you can do this. You can either do convert to double, you can do that. Oh, actually, you can't do that. That's my error. You can't do that either. So the best way to typecast, you have to convert this to an int. Oh, you know what? Let's try this. To int. Okay, that works. Reason why I was getting that error, because why would I try to convert a double to a double? See, that's live coding error for you right there. So you can do that, and this will basically cast this to an integer. But you don't need to do for this. It's not necessary to type all that. You can just simply, in parentheses, just type int. Same thing here, double, cast double. So a, you know what? This should be B. Let's see here. Yeah, we're gonna have it B. So here we're multiplying A times B. So what you're trying to do is multiply an integer and a double, but you can't do that. So that's why you have to cast this to an integer. So at runtime, the compiler knows, okay, we have to, this is a double, okay, but we have to cast this to an integer. Same thing here. Okay, this is a double, B is a double, 5.0, but oh, D isn't. So we have to cast D to a double. And here's you're going to print out the values. $25. Casting integer 25, casting double 25. So it's just multiplying. So we don't need that. So now let's look at strings. Casting a string. This is interesting. So I have a string X, string Y. String X is a string literal of 30.5. String Y, 25.5. Now, let's say, okay, before I show you, this, let's print out X and Y. So you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Now, if you noticed last week, we talked about strings, concatenating strings. So we're going to print out X and Y. And what should happen, it should just basically concatenate these strings. So there we go, 30.5, 25.5. It's just basically putting these strings together, concatenate these strings together. So, but what we want to do is we want to cast these strings and we want to get an actual value of the two numbers. So this is what we'll have to do. We're going to create a decimal. We're going to convert X to decimal. So this is when you use the convert class and call the two decimal method or whatever you're converting to. This is when it's appropriate. So we have string X 30.5. So we're going to declare a variable decimal and we're going to call this new X. And we're going to set that equal to X. But in order to do that, we have to convert this to type decimal. And you simply call the convert class, and then you call the toDecimal, which passes the string value of X. And then here we're going to, for Y, 25.5, we're going to call this new Y, and we're going to convert it to a double, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to multiply these two. But wait, decimal and double, how do you multiply these two? You can't, because you have to do another conversion. So we're going to declare this a double, and we're going to call this X and Y. And since new X is a decimal, we have to cast new X to double. Multiply that by new Y, which is also a double. So again, let's get rid of this double. We should get another error. Operator cannot be applied, depends of decimal and double. Local variable decimal, new X. So you can't assign that. So that, therefore we have to cast it. So now we're just going to print X and Y. So new X times new Y. What do we get? $777.75. Pretty straightforward, right? So let's comment this out. And we're going to wrap this up doing a little user input. And the reason why I'm going through and edit advanced so you can get familiar with the Visual Studio environment. So here we're writing a small application just to enter two numbers. So console.writeLine, enter a number, and the input is a string, right? Because C#, if you look at the main method, it takes an argument of strings. So anytime you input string, it knows to output string. So we're going to enter a number, and we're going to declare a variable called num, and it's going to be a type int, but we have to convert this console.readLine, because that's reading user input. We have to convert that to an integer because this is a string. See, console is a class, and readLine, if you hover over it, string, it returns a string. Same thing here, num2, we have to cast this to string or convert it to a string. So we have to convert these two variables, and then we're going to have another variable called total, and we're just going to add these two numbers. So whatever you input, The console is going to write the total. So let's run this. So enter number 25. Then we're going to enter second number 30, total 55. So now you will see the importance of understanding casting and converting different data types. You're going to use this quite a bit. A lot of times when you're writing user interfaces, like once we start UWP development or WinForms, we're going to have to cast numbers to strings and strings to numbers. So this is really important to understand, and I think you should play around with casting and converting different data types. Try playing with floating points and strings and just see what you can do. I just want to demonstrate a small example of casting and converting data types, and then on your own, what you should do is create your own program similar. You might want to create a console application that, a calculator. Create a simple calculator, create something basic, create a financial calculator, and use the decimal data type. Try different things. Try to create a scientific calculator. See what happens if you try to use double floats. That's the best way you will really learn. So I'll post the links. I'll post reference links to the documentation in the show notes. And like always, you can follow me on Twitter at Appaveli. You can follow me on Instagram at pragmaticdev_solutions. You can follow on Facebook at Appaveli Podcast. If you want to see the awesome apps that I'm creating, you can follow my company page, Pragmatic Dev Solutions, on Facebook. And hopefully you understand casting and converting variables. I hope you're inspired to get wired in and create your own and just play around with it. Don't get upset if you get a lot of errors and make mistakes. You can always reach out to me for help if you're stuck on a problem. Maybe this will help you get through a class assignment to understand casting and converting. And that's it for this episode. So I'm going to write more code, create more applications, and I suggest you stay wired in, and I am out.